Jim was just laughing at me because I realized that I have to brush my teeth before I can Zoom, even though,
Oh
like,
yeah.
clearly you're not going to be able to smell my morning breath, but still, like,
That's true.
I can't do it because
Yeah.
I'm like, what? It's
Can't do it
rude
without.
to have morning breath when you talk to people. Welcome to Barnyard Language. We are Katie and Arlene, an Iowa sheep farmer and an Ontario dairy farmer, with 6 kids, 2 husbands, and a whole lot of chaos between us. So kick off your boots, reheat your coffee, and join us for some Barnyard Language, honest talk about running farms and raising families.
In case your kids haven't already learned all the swears from being in the barn, it might be a good idea to put on some headphones or turn down the volume. While many of our guests are professionals, they aren't your professionals. If you need personalized advice, consult your people. Welcome to another episode of Barnyard Language. So, Katie, I'm going to start with you again as usual, and I hear some background noise. So, tell me what's going on the farm and in the house these days.
Well, the kids and I are in day 8, I think, of COVID lockdown. Daddy is home today, thank God. And what you hear is Charlotte on her, 92nd hour of singing the pirate song from Gabby Cats about how we're all kitty pirates now. She's been singing it a lot. At least she's cute. Other than that, we're all feeling pretty okay. Thank God for vaccines. And the one downside this week was that I special ordered 3 dozen handmade tamales, which I've been very, very excited about because tamales are one of my favorite foods and they're labor intensive, so I'm never going to make them. And I picked them up yesterday, the same day that I lost my sense of smell and my sense of taste. And that was not delightful. And yes, I did contactless pickup and everything, but still, I guess upside I drove around with them in my car and couldn't smell them, so that was probably just as well. Other than that, my one
Now, are they
real
freezable? Can you at least salvage
yes,
those?
yes, thank God, because 3 dozen tamales for just me would be a little ridiculous, no matter what.
I was thinking, but I mean, I wasn't sure how big they were.
Don't judge me, Arlene. Otherwise,
I'm definitely not.
my office faces our front porch, and Jim put a bird feeder out for me yesterday because all the blue jays have been flocking up here. And now we're kind of running a contest to see how fat birds can get and still be able to fly. I'm sure a lot of it's down, but I have 7 or 8 birds out there that look like softballs with tails. So it's getting a little ridiculous. And Arlene, I'm very excited about this positively farming media mastermind that you're doing, which will, I'm sure, help us with the show and make it awesome. And I just thought I'd throw that in there just in case it felt weird for you to like brag up your own taking the initiative to improve things around here.
Yeah, it's something that Katie and I decided together to start.
We did not.
on.
She just did it, which is awesome. I appreciate her just going ahead and doing it.
You're the one who's taken on a whole bunch of extra hours at your paid job. So I thought I could do some learning on the other end. So yeah, we joined this new mastermind. Well, it's not new, but new to us. And so I got to do one group call so far. So it's a mastermind that's made up of other ag podcasters. So, I mean, that's pretty exciting because, I mean, one of our goals for our podcast is create community with parents and with farmers, and creating community with other podcasters is awesome too. So thank you to the 2 people who started it, Bev and Caitlin. I'm excited to work with them and the other podcasters who are part of it. The update on our end, it's going to sound like we're never home, but we actually went away a second time in the same week, which was unheard of. But we just told our daughter that for her 16th birthday, we would take her somewhere on a trip. And, you know, COVID times, it wasn't going to be anywhere too far away or exotic, but we went to Guelph last weekend, which is the location of the Ontario Agricultural College and the university where my husband and I actually met. So she is thinking that that's where she would like to go next year, which seems wild that we're already at that stage of life that she's thinking about universities, but that's her idea at this point, is that's where she would like to go. So we went and did a tour. So we got to go inside some of the buildings. A friend of ours, actually someone that used to work for us in the summer and has gotten a 4-H calf from us in the past, she goes there now, as does her sister, and her sister's a tour guide. So we got a personalized tour, got to go in some buildings that were still shut at this point. They're just starting back into going to class in person. They've been virtual since Christmas break as well, like a lot of other schools were around here. So that was pretty fun to see what's changed on campus and see what's the same. And my husband got out his old Aggie jacket. So we actually went into the library at one point as part of the tour, and some first year Aggies saw his jacket and they compared notes on being an Aggie and campus life. So I think that made his day. He was hoping someone might notice his coat from 1999. They also mentioned that was before they were born. So that was nice too. Things are good. We've had a couple of calves lately, but no big baby booms recently. We got a little bit of warmer weather, which melted some of the ice, so the cows can go outside again, which is nice because it's been so icy that we haven't been putting them out for fear of them hurting themselves. So we got some squishy snow again. So they're outside a little bit today, which I think they all enjoy. And
Arlene, can you clarify for our non-cattle farmer friends what happens to cows on ice? I didn't know, honestly, before the first time I encountered it. It was horrifying. So,
well, I'm trying to think, is it Goofy? Or no, I'm thinking of the scene in Bambi, like that Bambi scene where Bambi goes out on the ice and his legs go in all directions. It's similar to that, except they don't bounce back up.
No, they don't. And for anyone who has gestated a child and had some, was it pubic symphysis pain? I think you can kind of envision what that's probably like for a dairy cow when her legs go opposite directions. It's bad news bears for cows. And also, Arlene, I'd like to wish your sister Maida a happy birthday. I know it's this weekend, right? Tomorrow, maybe?
Yeah.
She messaged to invite me to her birthday party on Saturday. I guess they're having an inflatable parade.
Yes, they're having an inflatable parade. I'm guessing you're not going to make it, though.
I know, I'm very jealous, but I did have to point out that since it's a 16-hour drive, I think, that I probably was going to have to pass, especially with the whole not being able to get into Canada, not being able to get back into the States situation.
Right,
but
yeah.
maybe we
and
could.
You're probably still not supposed to leave your house.
Yeah, that too.
Our guest today is Kristen Kelderman from East Central Ontario. Kristen is a master's mental health student who you can find on Instagram as the Farm Therapist. We ask each of our guests the same opening question. So Kristen, what are you growing?
Good morning, ladies. It's a pleasure to be here. Normally with a question like this in my background in marketing and communications, I would come up with some elaborate kind of fun little response to this question. But quite literally right now, I am growing 2 little babies, and my husband and I are expecting our first couple kids. So it's been a bit of a journey, and that's just kind of a new thing in our life right now. So that's literally what I'm growing.
Wow, congratulations. That just added a whole bunch more questions to our rough script that we have in front of us.
Right?
I have to say, I'm really impressed with your efficiency too. Because to just,
that was my husband's response. Totally. He's like, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it all in one. So yeah, it's been, that's been an exciting part of our life that we've just shared over the holidays with family and friends, and definitely wanted to bring that into our conversation today because I think it kind of meshes in with what we're going to chat about today. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm growing on until the spring at least.
And when are you?
That's very exciting.
We are expecting, so with twins, they usually come a little bit early. So we're just kind of keeping it fluid, probably somewhere around May-ish is when we're thinking. So my goal is let's have everything at least roughly, as much as you can. You ladies know with kids, it's probably highly unpredictable. May is kind of my due date. So that'll be a busy spring, but hey, let's embrace the chaos is kind of the attitude I'm having.
So other than babies, what are you growing in terms of social platform, career, that kind of stuff?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. That's really been a large part of pre-baby sort of been my focus and my kind of goal in life. So I am, as you said in the intro, I'm a student right now. So I went back to school to do my master's in psychology and neuroscience of mental health. And that's really been something that I've been quite passionate about. And it kind of grew from my personal experience in the mental health world and then my love and connection and background growing up on a farm. So that's something that I'm really kind of growing my learning, my knowledge base, my experience in talking about this, really important issue that has kind of come to the forefront. It's always been there. It's always been kind of like sort of the underpulse of our industry. I'm sure we can all think of stories and people that we've heard of that have struggled with mental health issues, but it's really just kind of coming up a little bit more forefront these days, with the pandemic, and then also just with people being a little bit more open and talking about these kind of topics. So that's kind of from a career standpoint. My focus is my education right now, and then beyond that, really trying to harness, what does this mean for our industry and agriculture in Canada and North America, and how can we grow this into a supportive community that we can talk about, we can connect, we can build, practical resources, and how can we help people have some of these conversations as well, because it's certainly happening out there in little bits and pieces, but just kind of like that really coordinating piece to bring mental health in farming and agriculture to the forefront. So that's sort of kind of, I would say, what I've been growing and is kind of growing alongside me at this point too.
So, Kristen, what is your background in agriculture?
Mhm. So yes, I did grow up on a farm. My background, I grew up on a dairy farm. My parents raised and milked cows, or raised and milked cows. They recently sold the cows and quota this past fall, which was a big life change. But really, I think when I look back on it now, agriculture was kind of my first secret love. And I say that, kind of as a kid, growing up on the farm, it was just the day to day that you kind of took for granted. And now as an adult looking back to it, it's like, wow, like how fortunate I was to have that experience and to really be raised in an environment that set me up for so much success. So my story, I started when my mom met my dad, I was about 5 years old. And we moved to the farm in Napanee. And it was basically, for me at the time, winning the kid lottery. Like, it was like going to Disney and getting to stay there like full time. And it was just a really incredible, eye-opening way of learning about life, learning about people, learning about food. And it was just, ingrained and every day that we got to get up and have this life. And sure, there were lots of days when I would grumble and I didn't want to, feed calves or help milk the cows, or winter. I'm definitely not a true Canadian. So when it was cold out, I was like, I don't want to go out to the barn. But I would bundle up and, head out there. And it was always, at the end of the day, it was always just such a satisfying feeling to be able to look back and see what we were able to accomplish as a family. And our farm, we worked really closely. I'm the oldest of 5 kids, and all of us were involved in the farm as kids growing up, doing chores and whatnot. And that's what really kind of grew my passion, kind of seeing, what my parents did every day, how that sort of rippled out into our community. And it wasn't really until I went away to university that I saw the larger impact of what agriculture really means. Because a lot of time, and I think it's true for some farmers, is we kind of have a bit of tunnel vision. We see what we know what we do on our farms, and we, now with social media and stuff, we're a little bit more interconnected and able to kind of see what other people are doing. But day in and day out, you're 100% focused on your operation, your crops, your animals, your family. And so for me, that door really like burst wide open when I went to the University of Guelph. And that really kind of set me up for thinking a little bit bigger about, well, maybe I don't want to, just milk cows every day. How can I use my skills and my talent to help, lots of farmers, and to integrate and to work with lots of farmers? Because I definitely have always been sort of a people person. So agriculture can be, a little isolating on the farm day in and day out. So my skill set, how can I use it to benefit our industry? And that's sort of where I fell into this area of communications and marketing. I really liked, kind of the fast pace, the creativeness of it. And that's where I spent 10 years of my career after Guelph, and really enjoyed learning and being creative and kind of being able to see a lot of different operations too. I not only worked with people in the dairy industry, but across, crops, other livestock species, fruits and vegetables. I've got to tour and see a lot of different farms, which is a really unique and kind of interesting perspective that it gave me. And all along as I was doing this, I was kind of sort of in the back of my mind trying to evaluate and assess, like, well, what are the pieces that I really like here? Like, what makes me excited about my job? And it was always kind of came back to the people. Like, that was always sort of it was the people that excited me, hearing their stories, listening to them. And the more time I spent, the more I got to hear like the real stories, right? It's not just what you talk about at the farm show or what's the latest, greatest. Like, you got to hear the struggle and you got to hear the triumphs from that, and just really connecting with that was really what kind of filled my cup and kind of made my heart grow 3 sizes, which was really exciting. So flash forward to the last couple years of this horrible pandemic, and I had a little bit of a pandemic epiphany or crisis, if you want to call it that, and reevaluated. My husband and I were kind of in a bit of a stage of flux where he was changing jobs and we had some opportunity to grow and whatnot. And I said, I love my job. I loved working in marketing and communications, but I knew it wasn't what I wanted long term. So kind of taking that time to reassess and reevaluate, I said, I think that I want to go back to school. And he was like, okay, how much is it going to cost me? First question out of his mouth. But being the very pragmatic person in our relationship, we agreed that was sort of the right direction for me at the time. And so, yeah, I've spent the last year and a half now studying mental health through King's College in London, England, virtually, which has been an incredible experience. And I've learned so much, but I've also learned so much about the knowledge and that kind of side, but also, seeing this sort of evolution of how agriculture is starting to sort of embrace mental health has been really reassuring to me. So in a nutshell, I guess that's sort of my background in this space and sort of where I've come from and what I hope to see sort of for our future as well.
I think it's really cool. I don't know how it is in your area about the acceptance of technology and whether the internet is, just for Netflix and wasting time, but it's really neat to me to see that we're living in a time where you can work on your master's degree from a university on the other side of an ocean, and that you can run a career that helps support your family and stay at home on the farm at the same time, that you can do off-farm work and farm and not have to choose, I'm going to stay home on the farm and give up everything else I wanted to do, or I'm going to do everything else I wanted to do and give up the farm. And that's, as someone who works from home, I think it's really, really cool that we're living at this time, and at a time that we can have a podcast and talk to people all over the world about
Absolutely.
their stories. And because, yeah, I mean, we started this because we wanted to hear what other people were doing. And
absolutely,
I won't speak for Arlene, but I'm really nosy, and I like to hear I like to hear other people's ideas. So
yes, yeah, absolutely.
it's very cool to me to have this technology. So where do the babies land in your master's degree situation?
Oh, man, that's a great question. That was my first real tough conversation with my husband. I was like, well, I had this plan to do school and now we're supposed to have these kids. Like, what's going on here? So after some tough conversations and just real conversations too, because, I think in some ways I'm very career focused. I'm hyper, I set out to do this goal, and now I'm having this kind of sidebar come in and having to pivot. And so thankfully, along with the technology allowing me to be able to do my schooling, our program is very flexible as well. So a lot of my classmates either work full-time or part-time as well at the same time. Some of them are family doctors or physicians or research scientists. I have no idea how they do that full time and school, but I give them all the credit in the world. But the program is really designed to be quite flexible, which is nice. So my plan is to sort of take take 4 months. So if they come springtime, kind of take the summer to, really focus on, okay, how do I be a mom? How do I figure all this stuff out and navigate and lean on my friends and family throughout the summer? And then my husband's job, he works in agriculture too. He works for a really great company that they provide paternity leave here in Canada, which I know is not something that's really accessible to a lot of people, or even, self-employed people like farmers. You just kind of make it work. But our plan is for the fall for him to take paternity leave. So then that kind of 4-month chunk, I can finish off my master's. So if all goes to plan, which I'll check back in with you this time next year, that's sort of what we're hoping to do.
It's weird because I know I, at least before I had the first baby, was like, well, nothing in my life will change. The baby will just work in, it'll be fine. And that's totally bullshit. It doesn't happen. But at the same time, the baby doesn't know if you're supposed to be spending 19 hours a day just like obsessively staring at them and never doing anything else. So it's a weird one because like nothing will go the way you planned, but everything will be fine. It's
right.
It may not look anything like what you expected, but it'll work out.
Right.
So
totally,
that is my
totally.
parenting in a nutshell right there.
I think we're on the same page, because that's
Yep.
I'm sort of preparing myself, and I am talking, my husband and I are really quite open communicators about this, and we're like, okay, like let's set the bar low, so then anything that happens above that'll just be benefit, right?
Yes, low bar is key to parenting, for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah, I
exactly.
think I shared something the other day just to our podcast Facebook page about, my gift to other parents is setting the bar really low so that the rest of you look better. Like, yep, that's me right
100%.
there. In a nutshell.
I love
my
it.
parenting experience.
So we want, one of our goals for the podcast, like we've said, is to be a resource for farm families and for parents. And I know that I'd heard a lot about postpartum depression. It's one of those things that I think gets talked about frequently and is done in all the parenting, the pregnancy classes, all that kind of stuff. But I honestly didn't even know that postpartum anxiety was a thing until after I'd had a couple of kids. And so I was wondering if you have any input from a research perspective, kind of where, like why they happen, and kind of the differences, and, just talk a little bit about both of those kind of postpartum issues that a lot of parents end up going through.
Absolutely. And like you said, Arlene, like it is something that's quite prominent. And I know a lot of doctors or midwives will talk about this in appointments and whatnot. And from my perspective, postpartum depression and anxiety, if we think about them, just kind of out of the context of pregnancy first, they're both extremely common and very serious mental illnesses that we hear about, or we've had experience with family or friends or somebody that we know. And really it comes down to how it negatively affects, how you feel, how you think, and how you act. And a lot of times, depression is kind of thought about in a very colloquial way, or like, everyday way, is like, oh, you're like, sadness is kind of how we associate depression. Sadness, low mood, and some of those kind of things. And then on the other side, anxiety is sort of what we can think of as being sort of that state of worry and like panic, and sort of around things that aren't really, are outside of our control, really, and how we obsess about that. So we have depression on one hand, sort of being that sadness side, and anxiety, this worry. And when we combine them together, like that's just a whole mess of shitstorm that we really don't want to be in. And so when we think about the kind of our symptoms around depression specifically, it's more than just being sad as well. Because I know some people, if you've got that sort of rough and gruff and sort of scaly exterior where like, oh, like, you can't get out of bed, like what's wrong with you? Like just, perk up and get out of that state. It's really more than that too. And that's kind of what science and research and psychology and psychiatry has helped us understand more, is that it's not just, being able to get yourself out of a low mood. There's significant issues here that kind of revolve around not only environmental factors, but behavioral factors, there's genetic implications that play at risk there. So it's not just, as simple as saying like, oh, I'm feeling sad. A lot of times, we might use the word like I'm feeling depressed like quite every day, but recognizing that this is a serious diagnosis of an illness. We see things in terms of symptoms, in terms of loss of interest or activity. So something that, you maybe enjoyed once before, you're really not, you're not interested in getting out and doing that anymore, whether that's a hobby or your job or being social and whatnot. We see with people who experience depression, we see signs of irritability, hopelessness, loss of appetite, loss of energy. Sleeping is a really big struggle for that, excessive crying, just kind of feeling worthless and like guilty about feeling all of these things as well. And then on top of all of those, and there's more beyond that too, there's a serious risk of suicide here as well. So that's really why we take these illnesses very seriously, is because of the potential loss of life here. And that's been, the prevalence of these illnesses. Depression, we see worldwide, it's about 280 million people. That equates to about 1 in every 15 adults. So, it's not as rare as you may think it is. And the other part is to remember as well is it's a sliding scale too, right? So we have everything from moderately depressed to severe depression. And that's really kind of a very important thing to remember as well, is that those depression isn't the same for every individual, and your symptoms may be very different and whatnot. So yeah, definitely more than just having a low mood and feeling like you can't get out of bed. The great thing that we have been able to, from a medical side, look at these illnesses with is that we do have treatments that are effective and that can work as well. So it's not all just a terrible, very depressing story. At the end of the day, is that we do have tools that we can access either through professionals or through helping ourselves that can help us get over some of these issues and these symptoms. So this is everything from, medication is often something that people will know a little bit about when it comes to depression, which unfortunately has been a little bit stigmatized in certain areas by media and the entertainment industry, but it's a real tool that can really help people if that's something they choose to go through. We have things like talk therapy or working with psychologists to work through some of these issues as well, about depression and anxiety. And that can be, very different. There's lots of different options to work with a therapist, whether you want to do something like cognitive behavior therapy. And then on the research side, there's also been quite a bit of support more recently for something called mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. So using kind of that mindfulness approach around like meditation and being self-aware, and using that to kind of help you understand either your depression or anxiety and how you can, use your own skill set to overcome some of those things. There's some more technical kind of treatments called electroconvulsive therapy, which is really kind of a much more rare treatment for depression, typically used for those who are diagnosed with very severe depressive, and the people who can have reoccurring depressive episodes too. So that's the other thing to remember too, is you may have one episode of depression or anxiety in your life and that's it. Or it might be something that you continuously live with throughout your entire life going forward. So those kind of things, and all these treatments I mentioned, they're prescribed by professionals. Your diagnosis comes from a professional, a doctor, a psychologist, or a psychotherapist, and that's really something important too, to realize that these are medical conditions too, right? We're not just out there self-diagnosing, saying, "Oh, I'm feeling so depressed," or "I'm feeling anxious." Like, yes, self-identifying is kind of your first step, and then seeking help and getting diagnosis, if that's something that you choose to do, is the process that you do. So all of these treatments can either be done individually or in combination too, and kind of seeing what works for you. It's kind of a bit of a trial to see, what connects with certain people. Some medications work for some people, and sometimes it's a combination of medication and psychotherapy. So, from a research side, we know a lot about these things, but there's still a lot that we really don't know too, which is both frustrating and also interesting from my perspective, and kind of, how we come about with some of these illnesses and what we can continue to look for and help people. So to get back to kind of the postpartum side of, because I know that's something very, very prevalent. And when I looked up the statistics that the other day, they were said 1 in 7 women will experience postpartum depression. So for every one mom who has a baby, that's a significant risk, right? And an anxiety, postpartum anxiety, that is kind of in the same similar realm of about 16% of women will experience that as well. So these are things that are quite common that we want to make sure we're aware of and talking about. So the interesting thing that I've kind of been reading a lot about recently is the transition from, instead of using postpartum, to peripartum. So we think a lot about postpartum being kind of like after baby's born. That's kind of when the illness sets in, or when we start to feel like we're struggling. And what we're sort of realizing now, and which kind of makes sense biologically when we think about pregnancy and how this sort of evolves and happens, is your body is changing way before you deliver your baby, right? And that, baby afterwards is, yes, a lot of stress as well. But even before that, your body is experiencing a lot of changes, a lot of stress, a lot of like, what the hell is going on? And so really kind of starting to look at it instead of that kind of postpartum era, looking at it is that peripartum depression. So once conception and, all of those changes start happening, that's sort of when we're noticing most of that kind of setting in, I guess. And then it continually progresses beyond from then on, and then kind of gets a little bit more exacerbated once baby's there. There's other stressors, other hormones, how do I keep this little human alive? Like all of those sort of stresses sort of come into play. So I think that's kind of a little bit of a shift in mindset from what we've traditionally seen and talked about from a depression and anxiety standpoint, and important for not only us as individuals, but also the doctors and midwives and nurses that kind of help you along through that journey too. And so it's kind of been interesting to look at it from that perspective, because this is a really vulnerable part of becoming a mom, right? Is all of these changes that are happening, not only hormones, but environmentally, stresses. Like if you're working on a farm and you're pregnant, you've got a lot of physical stuff that's happening to you. Like, even right now, like I don't work on a farm, but even just carrying the groceries in, my husband's like, don't carry the heavy bag. Like I'll do it. And I'm, the stubborn attitude. I'm like, I can carry this. This is fine. Like, you have some of those like self-identity things that are sort of changing along with that too, being like, no, I still want to be an independent woman. I still want to be a career driven woman. And I'm just going to, exactly like Katie said, fit this baby in where I can. So we've got all of this sort of stuff just kind of piling together and making this kind of potential storm or risk factors, I guess, is sort of all coming together. So it's definitely, like I said, a big challenge. We do have treatments available. And an interesting thing that I've kind of learned from my studies has been that there's been a lot of work done in third world countries more recently with women who experience postpartum or peripartum depression. And because their medical systems are quite different than ours and they don't have the same kind of support and whatnot. And I read something the other day that said that third world countries, if a woman sees a doctor once before she delivers, that's considered a success. And so that kind of just blew my mind a little bit when I'm thinking about, I'm in my second trimester and I've had, I don't even know how many appointments already with my doctors or nurses, or getting my blood taken. And I've had all of these kind of check-ins, which has been, really kind of mentally for me helpful to know, like, okay, baby's healthy, like, things are going as they should. But if you only get one visit with a doctor, like that's significant. Like I couldn't imagine what's sort of going through your head in that space. So a lot of efforts or a lot of research that I've been recently reading around third world countries, they've started implementing kind of these mom and baby programs because of the significant risk factors around postpartum depression that it's not only a risk to mom herself, it's also a risk to baby's health after delivery. And so what they've found is a lot of these very simple, nurse practitioner, or even in some of these, more remote communities where there's not a medical expert around, even some of the elders, just having someone who is willing to sit with a woman and talk and, kind of just ease some of that anxiety and that worry and that sadness. That simple, very simple action of talking can help to alleviate some of these serious illness symptoms that we see later on, and which is really quite astonishing when you think about, like, we can help each other get through this, which is amazing. We still see, significant prevalence around the world. Like we said, 1 in 15 and 16% of women will experience anxiety. So it's just kind of interesting to think of the different perspectives that we might not be used to given our circumstances as well. And while our health systems aren't necessarily perfect, we do have access, quite a bit of access, which is fantastic. So it's been really interesting to kind of see that research come about. And another piece that really kind of sparks my interest too is that this postpartum and peripartum depression and anxiety has also been researched in men too. So even though they're not the ones that are delivering or having these physical changes happen in their body, there's still a significant change that's happening in their life too. And sometimes I think we sort of push that aside and be like, oh yeah, like, you're not the one growing these tiny humans, what do you know, blah, blah, blah. It sort of gets left behind in the conversation and the story. But the interesting thing has been, from a research perspective, they found that fathers can experience it as well, and just as severely as women can, and up to 4% of fathers will experience those same symptoms too. So it's not always a gender thing, but it has been hyper focused on women, but really kind of expanding the equality around those conversations too, the saying that, and I'm sure this is something that not a lot of men talk about, and they're not always the ones going to those appointments and whatnot too. So thinking about where are the resources for them afterwards too, and how can they get help, is a really important part of that discussion and that conversation. So yeah, kind of in a nutshell, why does all of this matter? Obviously, it is a serious mental health issue. It's a disorder that affects a lot of people that we know and we love and that are in our communities. It affects mom, baby, family, fathers, everyone. And there's that really significant increase in risk of suicide. So we want to really be there to prevent that from happening and to give people a better, brighter outlook, because that's sort of what life is all about, is making it better for each other. So in a nutshell, that's kind of my long-winded answer.
Yeah, when you talk about, like the stressors of peripartum and postpartum, a lot of them do affect both members of a couple, whether you're the one bearing the child or not. Things like sleep deprivation and change of lifestyle, and additional pressure to take care of the family, whether that's in the physical sense of like looking after the baby, or feeling more pressure to take care of things as the person who's maybe working. And it just gives even more importance to things like parental leave, when you can hopefully ease some of that burden for both members of a couple, to not have to both feel all of that pressure to do everything, because those life stressors, like you said, are sometimes the trigger that brings someone back into that place, or leads into your first depressive episode potentially. Or
Absolutely, for sure. And like, we do know, there are certain risk factors, and like being a woman does predispose you that much more to being the potential for suffering from depression. So that definitely has a bigger risk factor, as well as where you live, what your socioeconomic status is. So living in poverty versus being more middle class, that has a huge factor on that too. So we do know some of those risk factors, but like you said, it's individual for everyone. Like, it just kind of, my breaking point is different than your breaking point, that's different than the next mom or dad's breaking point. Like, they're all so different. And that's where I think we really need to be compassionate and empathetic for people, that when we see them struggling, we don't always know what's going on at home or in someone's life. And just approaching that with a little bit more kindness and acceptance will hopefully start to change even just some of the stigma around these issues too, right?
For myself, there was such a sense of, well, a good mom would never be angry at her baby or
Mhm,
anxious or whatever else, or
mhm,
resent not having slept in however long, and even before the kid's born, that you're going to all these doctor's appointments and you're having to, you can't eat lunch meat or whatever, and there's this and this and this and this and this that you cannot do, because if you do, you are the worst person in the world and
mhm,
everything ever is your fault.
mhm.
And realizing that there's so much, this is the most magical time of your life and you'll fall right in love with this tiny human. And I
Yeah.
remember, both of our babies were C-sections, but the first one, they
Mhm,
do this huge surgery,
mhm,
and then, they take your glasses off and you're kind of pinned down, and then they shove this kid like in my face, and she's
mhm.
all gross, and I'm totally out of it. And I'm like, why don't I feel this instantaneous love that I'm supposed to feel? What kind of monster am I that I'm not like over the moon to have this slimy thing that I can't actually see because I'm not wearing my glasses and she's like against my nose,
Yeah.
and then everything's supposed to be the most magical days of your life. And I'm like, well, I haven't slept in, I don't know, 8 months or something.
Mhm.
And there was just so much, and it's bullshit. It is all
Absolutely.
bullshit. I call
Mhm,
bullshit on all of it.
mhm.
And that there's so much refusal to admit that anxiety can present as anger in a lot of people, and
Right.
especially
Yes.
for women, that being angry is such a negative thing. And,
Mhm.
what sort of monster would be angry at a newborn baby? And,
Yeah.
like I know I've said before that if you had a roommate who showed up, pooped on everything, screamed all the time, wouldn't eat what you made,
Yeah.
you know, kept you up all night, puked
Mhm,
on everything, and then
mhm.
everybody's like, well, don't you just love him? Isn't this just the best day of your life? Like, the fuck? If more
Yeah.
anyone thinks I'm a monster, I do love my babies more than life itself. There's
Mhm.
still days that I just go, what the fuck? Because
Uh-huh.
I'm just putting it
Mhm,
out there that babies, man, I mean, it can be the best thing that ever happened to you, but they're still going to puke on everything.
mhm,
I got
mhm.
puked on
Yeah.
3 times in a day and a half last week, and my kids are like in school age. They still puke on you. And I think it's
Yeah.
so much easier for people to ask for help when they know that nobody else's life is going right either, and that we're all
Exactly.
just trying to get to a place where we can survive it, where we can enjoy some of it. Once you get to a
Mhm.
point where you can enjoy some of it, you can work towards getting to enjoy more than 50% of it.
Right.
I have
Yeah.
days now that I enjoy up to maybe 93% of it. And that's really
Mhm.
pretty damn good. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like a solid night.
Right? Yeah.
This social media and just cultural expectation that we should enjoy 120% of every moment.
Mhm.
If you do, so we have to
Yeah.
stop this expectation that that is a realistic thing. It's not a
Yeah.
thing. It's not.
Mm-mm.
And
Mm-mm.
it's just not. And it's bullshit
No.
to expect it, and it's bullshit to expect that our husbands will magically know what we need, or our partners,
Mhm.
whoever that person is, will
Mhm.
magically, adjust to having a baby in their lives,
Yeah.
and that
Mhm.
anything will be the same, and that you'll ever have any idea what the hell's ever going on again. Ever.
Right. Absolutely.
So,
And I think Katie, like you just nailed it right there. It's all about expectations. And like just kind of going through these last couple months myself, like, I'm a very driven person. And so I think like, okay, like, okay, I'm gonna do my school. Like that's my focus. Okay, now I've got this like this wonky plan that's like taking me off my path. Like, how can I get back to this as fast as possible? And like setting those realistic expectations and kind of like how we put that bar. Am I going to put the bar like way up here? Am I going to be like an exceptional student and like super mom? No fucking way I'm not. Like, that is just way too much for me as an individual, because I know my anxiety is going to go through the roof. My therapist is going to tell me all the things that I need to be doing that I know I shouldn't be putting this level on myself, and we do it to ourselves. And unfortunately, I think there's some like cultural things too that feed into that, like social media. And the like, you know, me being like in my new mom phase, I was like, okay, I'm going to get some audiobooks, I'm going to read about this. And you know, I downloaded like 3 audiobooks on Audible. I started all of them, and I instantly returned every single one, because I was like, this is not what I want in my life. Like, all of this, you need to be doing this and you should be doing this. And have you considered that? And I'm like, I am going into overdrive and I can't even think. Like, I'm still trying to do school at the same time. I'm still trying to be, you know, like a partner in my relationship. I'm still trying to be like a dog mom, and I still have all these things that I want to do in my life. And like, it was just stressing me out. I was like, this is not okay. And, you know, on everybody who reads those books, like, what are they coming away with? Are they reading them thinking like, oh my God, this is the Bible, I need to like follow this? And it's like, some people, yes, right? Like, we've been so conditioned that this is the path to motherhood and this is how every mom does it. And, you know, people want to give you advice and all of this other stuff. And, you know, it's meant with good intention, I think, mostly, depending on who you associate with. But it's just kind of, yeah, it's a bullshit, right? Because we all have to figure it out ourselves. We can't walk in other people's shoes. We can't expect the highlight reel of social media that, yeah, baby's going to be great and sleep and blah, blah, blah. Like, that is, it just sets us all up for failure, I really think, ultimately. And unfortunately, that failure gets internalized, especially as a lot of women, we tend to internalize it as, I'm a bad mom, I'm a bad friend, I'm a bad partner because I'm not able to do everything and be everything to everyone. Well, that is not what I want to be. I want to set healthy boundaries so I can still be me. Like, at the end of the day, I, yes, am going to be a mom to these kids and I'm going to keep them alive. But to do that, I need to be me first. And some of that language has really been put down in a lot of what I've seen and read and heard and experienced, because it's like, oh, now you're being a selfish mom. And I think that is the message, that if I could wave my magic wand and get rid of anything in our language, it would be that selfish mom. Like, that is absolute bullshit, because you have to be you first to be able to show up for other people. And to me, that's something that we can hopefully cultivate, and through healthy practices that we can do ourselves, right? It doesn't have to be medication and therapy and like all this other things. There's lots of things that we can do from like a self-help side and from a coping side, and just really getting to know yourself, right? Like, it seems like the funniest thing because we spend 100% of our time with ourselves, but how well do we know our needs, our wants, our desires, like how we need to show up, how we communicate best, like how we want to live our life? And in my experience, we don't spend a lot of time really kind of like evaluating for ourselves to be like, you know, it's really important to me that I have, you know, I get a workout in every day, or that I eat healthy, or that, you know, I get to go for a walk by myself with no interruptions and no kids and no business talk and no nothing. Like, what are those things for you, right? Like, how can you build some of those practices so that when you do have, you know, people that depend on you, that you want to show up for, right? And it's not, a lot of times it's not that we don't want to do it, it's just we only have so much to give. And asking people to burn out, and you know, there's lots of times when we overgive of ourselves, and the person that suffers the most from that is us. And that's not good either. And I think that's where we really get ourselves into this cycle too, right? Perfect. Okay, we've got perfect mom. Okay, I'm going to do all these things. Okay, now I'm giving, 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 and now I have nothing left. And now I see this perfect mom thing, and we just like this cyclical negative patterns that just basically we flush ourselves down the toilet bowls until we break. And that is just so, that's not a message that is, communicated in these spaces a lot of times. And I think we can do better as individuals, as parents, as partners, as moms, to keep it real and to say, you know what, this is what I want to do. And I don't have to do anything more than that. Right.
I will say it was so liberating to me because I think there's such a backlash now against perfect parents too, that it's, well, your house is perfect. And for our listeners who can't see Kristen's house, there's a whole lot of white. It looks like it's probably real clean, but there's such a backlash against the mom who does still have a really clean house because she's probably not enjoying her kids. Her kids are probably never allowed to have any fun. Fuck that. Maybe she just really likes
Yeah.
her house being clean, and there's something else that she said is not a priority because she just
Yes.
doesn't care.
Mhm.
And you can't,
Mhm.
not everything can be the highest priority, but we have to let people have their priorities and know that they are not prioritizing those things at us.
Yes.
I Kristen's house would give me all the anxiety to let my children in there because it would be a shit show because
Yeah.
that's not a priority for our family. And it's awesome
Right.
that it is a priority for Kristen. It's just, and
Mhm.
I am assuming that she has not decorated her house at me, that it's not
No.
a personal judgment
That's right.
of my
Yeah.
house that her house doesn't look like mine.
Exactly. So
I
that's
think
kind of,
Katie and I have talked about this before too, and tied it back into the farming aspect too, right? Where it's like no one else is farming at you. They have different land, different expectations, different history, different financial situations, like, but we get into that mindset of, oh, that person started planting, that person, is doing something different than me. Is that a judgment of what I'm doing? Do they think I'm backwards? Do they think I'm not doing it right? Do they have some kind of knowledge that I don't have? And we can tie that back into parenting too, right? Where it's like, oh, if I'm not doing the same as them, maybe I don't know something. Maybe I don't understand something. Maybe they're doing it because they think they're better, all that kind of stuff. And most of the time no one's thinking about us, right? No one, and if
exactly.
they are, that's their issue, right? But
Yeah.
like,
Mhm.
you've got you have to parent the kids you've got. And
Mhm.
like, as mine have gotten older, I mean, I've got four, they were all completely different babies, and they're all completely
Right.
different as they get older.
Mhm.
And even if I try and parent my own kids the same as each other, it doesn't always turn out because they have different needs and they have different personalities, and I can't be
Mhm.
the same thing for each of them. So yeah, we've got
Mhm.
to live in our lane and support each other without that judgment. But I think sometimes, depending where you are in your own mental state, what other
Mhm.
people doing can feel like a judgment, even if it has nothing to do with
Mhm.
how someone actually feels about you.
Absolutely. For sure. For sure. And I think that's such a, yeah, such an important thing. Really, like, stay in our lane and just like, and like, that is such a good insight that we often think that people are thinking about us when they absolutely, we're selfish individuals. A lot of, like, humans are selfish individuals. Like, there's a lot of good people out there, but you oftentimes think about, if somebody's walking past you in the grocery stores, laughing with your friend, you're like, oh, like, did I say something, did I do something weird, like, and they're like, no, they're talking about what they did last night, like, and how funny it was or whatever. Like, we all have these, like, these little things. And it's just kind of like, I don't know if it's like biologically ingrained in us or if it's some sort of like evolutionary thing, but it's terrible. And
Yeah,
yeah, like, we just don't think, like, we always, people are not obsessed with us, right? Like, as much as we might want to, we live
they
in our own
should be,
bubble.
but
Yeah, I know, right?
And even if they are, like, if they seriously have nothing better to do than to be that
Mhm.
interested in what I'm doing,
Yes.
like, that says a lot more about them than it does about me. And I know now it was a real shock to me the first time somebody said, well, you're such a relaxed mom. I'm like,
Mhm.
dude, this is a lot of medication. Okay, this is a lot of medication and a lot of therapy.
Right.
But I mean,
Yeah.
I absolutely still have times where I'm just horrified that somebody saw me parent some way and, is probably totally judging the fact that I yelled at my kids. And
Right.
there's still things that happened. So I took the kids to baby yoga when the girl child
Mhm.
was 2, maybe. a year and a half, and
Mhm.
the boy child was younger than that. And it was at our local library, and it's all the yoga mommies. You know, for rural Iowa,
Mhm.
we live in a town with a lot of yoga mommies, and they're all with their perfect children who, of course, have never puked on anything and, you know, probably came out knowing how to, like, stack Montessori blocks or some goddamn thing. You know, I'm sure that none of these kids have ever thrown a tantrum or
Right.
anything.
Mhm.
And my kids are just fucking berserk because
Mm.
probably the formula made them crazy. Like,
Probably.
probably. Then she goes tearing out in the hallway, falls on the steps, busts her two front teeth. There's blood everywhere. She's screaming. I'm crying. I've still got the baby. There's, you know, and I'm
Mhm.
just like, we can never even go back to town, let alone back to baby yoga, you know? Like, I still
Yeah.
think about this because I had to take her. Turns out they can just file their front teeth down. And it turns out, like, it was a really good lesson for me because I took her into the dentist, you know, and I'm still crying. Like 3 days later, I'm still crying about this.
Mhm.
And the dentist goes, coffee table or stairs? And I was like, what? She goes, well, we only see kids for two reasons for stuff like this. Did she fall off the couch or she fell down the stairs? And I was like, oh, stairs. And she goes, you would not believe how often
No.
my kids did this. And I was like,
Right.
you know, when you're
Yeah.
the
Yep.
nurse at the doctor's office will tell you some horrible story about something that happened to their kid, and you're like,
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
know, if it happens to everybody,
Yeah.
then really anyone whose kids are perfect is the
Mhm.
weirdo here. It's not
Exactly.
those of
Mhm.
us with our kids with the jacked up front teeth.
That's right. And I think like that's the what we can do and how we can move forward is about normalizing these things, right? Like just being very apparent and like, yeah, this happens, right? Shit happens, life happens. And it's not unlike what happens on the farm, too, right? Like we have good years, we have bad years, we have challenges and successes, and how we look at that, our attitude, how we approach those things, like that's what really will help us, progress in our journeys and be more accepting of when we do see something that's different. It's like, oh, your instinct isn't to be like, oh, that's bad, or oh, that's, I would never do it that way. It's like, oh, that's really interesting, or like, what can I learn from this? Like how we form our attitudes and our opinions on things really is a reflection of, I think, who we are as people and where we are in our journeys. If we're able to instead take that judgment element out and be curious about things and be like, hey, you know what, I've never thought of it this way, or be that yoga mom that steps out and be like, you know what, this happened to my firstborn, it's going to be okay, take them to the dentist, it happens all the time. If we can help foster that normalizing of practices, and I know in my experience with therapy and working with a couple different professionals, that's really been what's been a lot of my breakthrough is like, I'm not alone, right? Like we are not alone. We're not alone as individuals, as moms, as farm people, as farmers, as business people. And that really starts to change the conversation and how we approach some of those things too, so that we're not always setting these stupidly unrealistic expectations and being like, okay, you know what? I got this. This is going to be all right. And when I need to lean on my people, I can, because I don't feel ostracized for being a bad parent or not being able to get my crop in early this year or having an animal die on my farm. All of that happens, right? And as like kind of what we said in the beginning, we all farm in our own jurisdictions on our own farms, and we get so hyper focused on that, which is what we need to do. And then a lot of times it's the support people like the veterinarians, the crop advisors, the people, that they're kind of the ones out there that are seeing everything. So I think there's an important role to play there too, from their conversations and how they talk to people about, what's going on, either, from a business side or from a mental health side too. And same thing with mom life. Like we can support moms in the same conversations, as well as, leaning on the nurses and the professionals that are there to help us too. So really just kind of taking those those stressful times and be like, hey, this happens all the time and it's probably going to happen again too, right? Like we're not going to be immune from this in our lives, and to create that kind of fostering conversation instead of ostracizing and then internalizing all of that badness, or that like, oh, I'm not good enough, I guess, like kind of idea around being a parent and a mom and a farmer and a community member. I'm not good enough to, keep all of these things, all of these balls in the air and be all perfect. Like, bullshit. Total bullshit, for sure.
Well, and I think too, there's become such a thing around, well, are you doing your best? And it's so easy to internalize that as giving 110% at all times is your best. And there's days that like 85% is your best. And there's days that is anybody on fire is your best. And that's just how it is. And hopefully you're not at a is anybody on fire stage all the time. If you are, you should probably reach out for help, because I've totally been there. And, that's not a good place to be. But if you're surrounded by judgy assholes, you're not the problem. You just need to find new people. If you're being honestly being judged a lot, find new people. And if you're worried that everybody is judging you all the time, find a therapist. Because, if everybody is a problem, it's probably you. If some people are a problem, it's probably them.
Absolutely. And I think, Katie, that's a really important part of kind of the mental health journey too, is being critical about who you do surround yourself with, because not everybody in your life is good for you. They might be good for other people, but recognizing what's important to you and what gives you strength and who supports you. It's been a hard lesson that I've had to learn in my life as well. Being, my 20s, I was very outgoing and wanted, you want everybody to like you, and you want to be accepted, and you want to, kind of be in that space of just like, ooh, feeling really good about yourself. And I think it's something that maybe comes with a bit of maturity as well, and kind of realizing that, seeing people's true colors as well, as you experience some of that backlash from the drama and whatnot that happens in life, and just really recognizing that who's the most important to you. And I always had this idea in my mind that, as I got older and I wanted to maintain all of my friendships, and I wanted to, make sure that I stayed in contact with everyone. And it was so important to me, especially in university and high school, like, having a lot of friends was kind of a bit of like a status symbol. And the older I got, the more you realize, first of all, you don't have time for any. And then secondly, you evolve as a person too, right? Your priorities change, your goals in life change. And it's okay to have those different relationships flux and grow, and the ones that are meant to stay with you, like my longest girlfriends, we can not talk for a year or more sometimes, just because life is busy and they're off doing their things and I'm doing my things. It doesn't mean that I don't love them and I don't want to connect with them, but we can just pick up right off where we left. And those are the relationships and the people that I want to keep in my life, and to foster that and to keep that going. So, recognizing that life isn't static. You're going to grow, you're going to change with friendships, with families, with your partner, as well as you go through different chapters in life as well. It's kind of like, and farming too, right? Like through different farming seasons and whatnot. That's really just how life evolves, and being able to embrace that, and to recognize we can't control everything either too. I think that for me, for sure, has been a huge part of how I've been able to kind of like calm down my type A-ness has been to really recognize what you can and can't control and focus on that too. So yeah.
I'm gonna have to go. But you guys go ahead and keep going with the interview. I think it's going awesome. And if there's anything you need me to record later on, Katie, I can do that at another time. Okay.
Okay.
We got to get to the
Awesome.
doctor.
Okay. You bet, Arlene. Thank you
Nice
so
meeting
much.
you.
It was great to meet you in person, in screen.
Yes, for sure.
All the best today.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
All right. So, Kristen, I'm just going to skip ahead and outline here, because
Sure.
otherwise our episode's going to be like 3 hours long. This
Yeah.
happened before. We've had episodes that were a solid 2 hours, and I was like, I don't know that anybody wants to listen to this much. a lot.
Fair enough. I wouldn't want to listen to me that long either.
No.
All
This
good.
is actually why I decided I needed a co-host for the podcast, because nobody wants to listen to me just like yak on for an hour. So what county fair contest could you dominate?
Oh, you know what? That is a really great question. I'm gonna have to rack my brain a little bit about that. It's been a while since I've been to a fair,
It can
given
be a made-up
COVID.
contest too.
Oh, okay. Well, I would say something around. So I'm the oldest child of 5 children, and both my parents are oldest children as well. So I come by I'm going to call them leadership skills, very very uniquely. So something about being like either around being like the loudest or the bossiest in the category. Or I'm also a really good baker, so I think I could do pretty well and kick butt in some kind of like baking competition for sure.
I'll tell you, we refer to the girl child as having strong leadership skills instead of being bossy, and I love for myself how much that reframes the behavior to view it as
Right.
a positive thing that maybe needs some direction instead of
Mm-hmm.
you're not the
Mm-hmm.
boss of me because you're 5,
Yeah.
sort of a thing. She gets it from me
Totally.
too, so I can't really like
Yeah, it's
get
hard
too
to,
cocky
yeah,
about it.
rein that
Yeah.
in. Totally.
All right, so now we're on to cussing and discussing, and this segment is a place to air our grievances, discuss random topics, whatever else. Arlene put in here that it's our podcast and we can do what we want. So, nobody's the boss of our podcast either. If any of our listeners would like to cuss and discuss, you can send us a voice memo at speakpipe.com/barnyard language or an email and we'll read it out for you. So, Kristen, what have you got to cuss and discuss this week?
Well, I didn't have to rack my brain too hard on this one, but when Arlene sent that, I guess my brain kind of first went to, what we're living right now is like through the pandemic, and I'm sure everyone is so sick and tired of talking about it and listening to it, myself included. But I do try to stay up on, current news as much as I can, or as much as is good for my mental health. That was definitely something that I recognized like early on in the pandemic. I was like, I need to like reel this in because too much of this is just not good for me. But the thing that's kind of been like poking at me a lot lately, and I know the more the pandemic goes on, the more we all get like fed up with it. But it's just kind of the idea of like the media keeps putting this like facade in our heads about getting back to normal life. And I think that is just such a bunch of horseshit that we in the years I guess we're going into now that we've lived in the pandemic, normal is not an option anymore. And like what I really think, like it frustrates me when they keep saying this, because it kind of means that we're stepping backwards, right? Like that we're going back to something that we once knew. And as a society, even as an individual, like I feel like I've changed. Definitely, we've all kind of learned and grew and regressed and had all of these experiences through this pandemic. So my pet peeve or piss off is this media constantly like bombarding us with like, oh, when we get back to normal life. And I'm like, we need, in my opinion, we need to think of it as we've evolving into something new and something different and something hopefully, better that we can kind of grow towards. So that's sort of been what's floating around my brain the last couple days.
Yeah, it feels like too, for folks who've lost people, that getting back to normal just kind of pretends it never happened. And
Yeah.
that's really horrible. And so it seems like
Mm-hmm.
the right memorial for that loss is to look at
Right.
how we can be better and how we
Yes.
can improve and
Mm-hmm.
really focus
Mm-hmm.
on our priorities and things. And it
Yes.
has been interesting to me realizing what my priorities actually are for things versus what was
Mm-hmm.
just what we did because it was normal.
Right. Yes.
So that's,
Unexpected, right? Like
yeah.
absolutely, for sure. No, that's a really good way to reframe it, for sure. But yeah. So what's been on your mind, Katie? Tell me
Well,
tell me what you've been dealing with.
so first I'm going to read Arlene's. It says that they got a bunch of ice, which led to freezing rain and ice, and now it's still
Oh.
cold, so it's still icy. And she said, I'm afraid I'm going to break my butt. The cows can't go outside safely, and there's no telling when it will break up. Yeah.
Totally.
And
Yeah.
the we got some winter weather here the last couple days too, and I'm generally the chill mom who's like, go ahead and climb that thing and we'll see if you fall off and break your neck or not.
Right.
But the kids running around when it's icy when we're going into daycare and there's like a flight of cement steps and there's a road and there's cars and there's
Hmm.
ice just
Yeah.
puts me over the edge. The other thing for me is this, as an American, Canada obviously has some different responses to the pandemic than we have
Hmm.
had. But this, well, everyone, it sounds weird since we just spent an entire hour and a half talking about not judging people. Um, that only counts for shit that only impacts them and their family. That does
Right.
not count for everything else, and not just
Hmm.
vaccinations, but
Hmm.
everything else that comes along with living in society with other humans.
Agreed.
Um,
Yeah.
and something I'm really struggling with right now is this phrase, we'll give them the benefit of the doubt about whatever. And
Hmm.
finding that line in personal relationships, in public relationships with society as a whole, whatever, of
Hmm.
what is giving someone grace because they're humans and humans fuck stuff up because
Hmm.
that's what we do,
Right.
versus you're just being an asshole and I don't want to deal with it
Right.
and you're wasting my time.
Yeah.
And that's a really hard line to draw. So if anyone has any advice or thoughts or wants to
Hmm.
yell at people for me, let me know. It's a hard one.
Yeah.
And it's,
Absolutely.
I think we
Mm-hmm.
forget how exhausting it is to hold boundaries. And especially in people in places where you want to maintain a relationship, but you have to keep holding that boundary and keep assessing where that boundary is, and especially with
Hmm.
children, about assessing where their boundary in that relationship with other people is, and
Hmm. Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
and
And even just the phrase too, like give them the benefit of the doubt. Like to me, it almost like, yes, you want to be a kind and a compassionate and an empathetic individual, but it almost kind of takes the accountability out of things, right? To just say like, okay,
exactly.
well, it just sort of, yeah, leaves it airy fairy. And that's not good for helping to set those boundaries. And we know boundaries are important, right? Like that's how we maintain our sense of self and our values as people too, to not let people just push us over, right? So it kind of gives a little bit of just a free for all almost. And yeah, I don't really like that phrase either. That kind of doesn't sit well with me.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I realized we were talking a couple weeks ago about how I feel like I have, Robert De Niro style circle of trust now, and the people inside the circle are guarded pretty ferociously, and
Right.
the people outside the circle are pretty far outside the circle. But dealing with the people who are
Hmm.
sort of standing on top of that wall is not my strong point. I am a very
Mhm.
black and white, in or out kind of person. And,
Mhm. Mhm.
you know,
Yeah, and with some of these
it's,
tough topics too, whether it's the pandemic or farming or mental health, like people do have strong opinions about these things, and sometimes they're not always rooted in how we see things either, right? So like kind of trying to find that common ground is not always we're not always able to, right? So
yeah.
then once we hit that, then how do you, like you said, if you want to or feel the need to maintain the relationship, that gets really tricky. And how we position ourselves and try to stand our ground, but also see it from another perspective. Like agreeing to disagree is one way, but that also doesn't really solve or push us forward in conversations around some of these tough topics either. So it's really tough. Absolutely, it's really tough. So
Well, and I feel like as someone who puts a lot of effort into trying to maintain a positive, action oriented, how can we
mhm,
improve things
Hmm.
outlook on life,
Right.
but also, no, I'm just done with you. And
Hmm.
trying to maintain that positive outlook while also not burying your head in the sand about very real problems and struggles and things, and
Hmm.
engaging with people who refuse to admit that there are actual problems that need to be addressed. And
Right. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. That sounds like a whole podcast episode in itself.
yes, we'll just have to come back and do another whole
Yeah.
episode when Arlene can stay for the full five
Right.
hour live episode where we fix everything that has ever gone wrong. Thank you for joining us, Kristen. I'm just going to like force us to be done so that we're not
You bet.
sitting here for the rest of the day. Where can folks find you online?
Yeah, so I have a couple of different platforms that I use. Instagram is definitely my most favorite. I am a millennial. I haven't really jumped ship to TikTok full bore yet, but Instagram, I manage my kind of what I would call professional account as the farm therapist. I also have just my personal account, so that'll I'm sure be full of parenting and baby type stuff in the future to come. So you can find me at Kristen Kelderman on Instagram as well as Facebook. I have one of my pre-pandemic goals was I exited from Twitter, so I'm not part of that shitstorm anymore,
Not
just for my
missing
own mental
anything.
health.
Oh my
Yeah,
God.
no, good. I'm glad to hear that.
I've realized too,
I am
because I
so
am not
glad.
a, I am an elder millennial, so I am not
Yeah.
as well versed in some of this, that Twitter has decided to only show me people that will enrage me because
Yes.
I look at it and so then it just shows me more of this shit. And I'm just like,
Right.
nope,
Mhm. Mhm.
nope,
Yeah.
just not
Yeah.
even gonna look at it because just
Exactly,
not.
exactly. So I've definitely jumped ship from that, but yeah, Instagram is my kind of home on social media. So if people want to reach out or connect there, they absolutely can.
Well, good to know. Yeah, Arlene's oldest child said that our Instagram looks like a mom Instagram. I'm like, well, funny thing. Turns out we're moms,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I'm still not entirely sure what she meant by that. I am apparently not doing Instagram correctly, but we're
You
all
know
about
what? You're on
authenticity,
brand.
right? So, yeah,
On
exactly. We're
brand.
on brand.
Exactly. Absolutely. Absolutely. Everyone can be a critic, right?
Yep, yep. I did joke I was going to pay our 15-year-old babysitter to explain TikTok to me because I just don't get it. And I was like, I'm sure I could figure it out myself, but it'd be way more efficient to just slip her $20 to explain it to me.
Hmm.
Or
Yeah,
maybe I could just
absolutely.
hire her to manage our socials.
Exactly. When in doubt, go to the younger generation. I do that with my sisters all the time. I'm like, can you tell me what this is and why I would use it? They're a wealth of information for sure.
Yeah, it does feel too like once you have to start Googling the hip slang that the young people are using, like if you have to Google to find out what it means, you're probably too old to be saying it. So,
Exactly. Exactly. Just accept it and move on.
yeah. Okay, well, I am going to wrap up the episode because our robot vacuum just started and is running all crazy around the house. I didn't
Awesome.
expect her today, but here she is. So, all right. Thank you, everyone,
Awesome.
for joining us today on Barnyard Language. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and occasionally TikTok as Barnyard Language. And on Twitter, we are Barnyard Pod. If you want to connect with other farm families, you can join our private Facebook group. You can find it as Barnyard Language Group. We also have a show page under Barnyard Language Podcast. Please like, rate, and subscribe to this podcast. And if you enjoyed listening, please leave us a good review. Or a bad review if you hated it. We'd rather know the honest truth, I guess. We are on the lookout for future guests for the podcast. If you or someone you know would like to chat with us, please get in touch. You can support the show by becoming a patron on the Barnyard Language Patreon. A small monthly donation keeps us in coffee and also offsets the expenses of producing the show.